Hey everybody, it's Bust with our Runeterra Expedition tier list for patches 2.7 and 2.8. As usual, you can go ahead and skip down below and get straight into the tier list chat if you want, before I go over all of the things we normally talk about, but I do want to mention that I have a few notes to go over as far as the general release of these cards before we get down into the actual tier list if you want to stick around for another couple of minutes. So the three things I always like to call out, if you head over to ftpbust.com, all the versions of my tier list will appear on my personal Runeterra Expedition site. The tier list section up top will have the text version of this. It also gets a little bit more in depth than the image version, the infographic version. You can kind of find some good pairings for each of the card pools within each of the tiers. The image version is here as well. That's what we'll be looking at as we talk through this video. But if you want to find an easy to locate image version, that's on the site here as well. Thing number two, the way that we assemble these card lists is we look at this as a build around strategy. And so if we take, for example, here at the middle of tier 1, this Discipline Z, this card pool is meant to be kind of a hand buff strategy where you're using Greenglade Elders and Jeweled Protectors to increase the size of elusives and then smash your opponents with those elusives. And so we're looking specifically at that build around strategy. That does have some of these champions that are quite fantastic. Say like down here at the very bottom in tier 5, on the bottom left, we have this Tears from the Deep Maokai. The reason he sits down here is this pool is meant to build around sea monsters, and this Tears from the Deep Maokai only has 2 sea monsters in that pool. One of them is a rare and Sea Scarab, one of them is an epic that you'll probably never see. So if you're wanting to come out here and build around sea monsters, it's a little bit tough to do with Maokai. It's not to say that this isn't a fantastic card pool. If you want to get access to Blighted Caretaker and Neverglade Collector, this is a fantastic way to do it. Then, last and not least, I do cover 2 patches at a time. I don't think that there's enough change between the small patches and the big patches to warrant making 2 of these videos, and so you should be pretty up to date for the 2.8 patch. If there are some major changes or shakeups, then I'll most certainly make a new video, but starting with these, I do expect this to be good for about a month or so. So if you want to bookmark this and return to it, or it should be good info until the 2 non-patch. And so, yeah, as far as these new cards go, we've had quite a bit of fun here with the Defenders of the Ancient. The big additions here were basically we have the Token Attacks deck that has kind of been the scourge of Expedition for the past week or so. That focuses on Azir and Irelia. The other big additions here mostly focused on landmarks with the addition of Malphite, the addition of Zillion, and the various landmark countdown type cards, and then the additional predict cards. And so those have been the big shakeups and the real new additions to Expedition. But I did want to mention some of the cards that don't seem to have made their way in this patch, whether or not that was intentional, whether or not they're not going to show up until additional card pools are added. The big ones, Zillion, not in Expedition as far as we can see. I have not seen him myself or heard reports from anyone seeing a Zillion. Pretty sure he just doesn't exist in the format. You may be able to find him in a trade pack whenever they offer you up trades for champions. It seems like all of the cards in the game do live in those trade picks, but I would not suspect you'll see him until a future patch. The other big ones that have a lot of implications to Expedition but haven't quite made their way there yet are Dancing Droplet. That's the Ionia 1/1 elusive for 1 mana with a tune that draws a card if you recall it. Just a big old mountain of value, a nice little aggressive unit to add into Ionia. You can get it through trade picks. I've had it a few times through trades. Does not appear to live in any of the card pools as it is. Same thing applies to Solari Sunhawk. That is the new Targon card. It's a 2/3 for 2 mana that daybreaks to stun your opponent's strongest unit. Does not exist in Expedition. We expect it to be here at some point. We kind of ran into this issue with the release of the first patch of not Call of the Mountain, whatever the previous set was. There was some issues getting all of the cards into Expedition that may or may not have happened here. Regardless of whether or not it was intentional or not, those cards do not exist in Expedition. And so, yeah, now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right in and get to talking about these tiers. So, up in tier 1, no changes. This is still just our standard set of champions from the last time. Both Callistas, both Lee Sins, both Zeds, both Nocturnes, and then Slayers. Kindred and Retribution Lucian. Nothing changed in the format so far. There were no new additions that made me not want to play these cards. The landmark theme still just gets blown up by all of these aggressive decks. These are all still pretty good strategies. So the only cards I did want to call out here, though, was for Lee Sin. There's the addition of Lead and Follow. It doesn't seem like, a spectacular card as far as Lee Sin is concerned. This is the 2-mana recall that adds a flawless duet to your hand, but Lee Sin is always super interested in a single spell that can generate 2 spells, and so that adds into the Lee Sin theme, makes him a little bit stronger. Not a card you're super excited to go and chase down, but it is on theme for him. And then, kind of importantly, but not so much for the Shadow Isles pools, the addition of the Wings and the Wave, extremely powerful card. Just fits in all of the Shadow Isles decks, whether or not they're looking. Well, I should say all of the Slay decks where they're looking to have sacrificable units, but it is epic, and so good luck finding it. We would love to see that guy be a common, but just not the way it is. And so no shake-ups in Tier 1. In Tier 2, only slight changes. I have taken Tahm Kench out of Tier 2. He is, still extremely powerful. He does, generate a removal spell every turn of the game, and that's something that you really have to respect in Expedition or a limited format in any game. Just a consistent source of removal spells, but he really needs to be paired up with the healing cards. And now that we've added in more and more and more and more Targon pools, it's much harder just to have those cards show up. And so in the past, we might be able to get some of the healing cards out of the various Aurelian Soul pools. There's 1 or 2 other ones that have the Star Shaping and then the 2-mana Heal 2. But he's really looking for the 4-mana spell that restores 4 health and gives him 4 toughness. It's just much harder to get the density of removals or the density of healing spells that you really need now that you're going to get a bunch of like random landmark packs and such. And so he's still good. He's just not up here in the Tier 2 land where things don't have to go super right for you to have a 7-win deck. So his replacement in Tier 2 is this Token Attacks Azir. This is kind of the nemesis of Expedition at the moment, if you will. He is going to kind of like tone himself down over the course of the following patches. As a set is released, there's something like a 300 or 400% bonus to see these new champion card pools. And then as these start to fall off, you're not going to be running into so many Azir plus Irelia decks. And so without getting like access to the full combo, it's not as easy to get a strong Azir deck together. But the real strength in him lies is, say we take a pack 1 Azir, or even if we just take like a pack 1 Total Recall Karma. Any Ionia card pool that has access to Greenglade Duo gives you just a humongous power boost as far as this Azir is concerned. And so it's not super hard for Azir to find a great pairing in Ionia. He's happy to go into, pretty much just every single card pool. If he pairs up with Zed, he's super happy. If he pairs up with, I believe it would be like Solar Winds Yasuo or Total Recall Karma that both have Greenglade Duos. Both Zeds have sparring students. It's just there's so many easy ways for him to get this just like small selection of cards that he wants out of Ionia, and then he's not looking for like a huge number of the blade generators. And so Azir is the real powerhouse as far as this tokens deck is concerned, and getting this like guaranteed Irelia pairing is pretty strong with him. A lot of the previous packs with Azir, you were just seeing 3 random champions come up because Ascension was a single champion card pool. Now that he's paired into another faction that he actually wants to be paired with, extremely powerful things. And so, if you're hating these days of seeing all these Azirs running around, that shouldn't be a thing for too much longer. He will most certainly subside in the frequency that you'll see him, but I don't think the strength of this deck is going to die down anytime soon. It's just such a strange strategy to have to try to combat. If you're wanting to say, okay, well, typically if I want to deal with a lot of go wide strategies, I would just hit them with an Avalanche or a Chempunk Shredder or something, but those don't really interact with the tokens, and so you have to try to find different ways to do it. And so I think it adds a touch of a rock, paper, scissors aspect to Expedition, but as far as that goes, you're not going to be seeing these nearly as much frequency after about a week or so from when this video is released. So down here in Tier 3, there's a few shakeups in Tier 3. I did notice that I pushed both Total Recall Karma and Collective Support Lulu up into Tier 3. We had to find some replacements in the lower tiers, and these are the cards, the pools I felt like could move up. And so I forgot them in the image. I'll have to get that updated after I finish making this video, but not a whole lot to say about those. The real strength in both the Collective Support Lulu and Total Recall Karma, they both play into fantastic Elusives decks. Karma has access to Greenglade Duo. The Lulu has access to Young Witch. Lulu also just got her 3 attack buff here recently, and so they've been kind of like, right on the borderline of pushing up, moving out of Tier 4 into Tier 3, and now they've just had some kind of bad, some much worse card pools end up behind them that moved them up into the land of mediocrity. And so those made their way in. As far as the new cards are concerned, this is where both Malphite card pools landed and where Irelia landed. And to speak to those a little bit, since they're both new card pools, kind of what we see with this Irelia pool is she either wants to find as many Greenglade Duos as she can, which is fine, or she wants to get paired up with Sharima so she can just find the Azir cards. Azir is 100% better than Irelia at doing all of the token things. He comes down, just starts doing the additional attacker thing for free. You're just playing units. Just playing units is how you level up Azir as far as attacking with Irelia. It's just everything you want, like every metric you want to compare these champions on. Azir just does it all better. And so, as far as Irelia is concerned, she has to get a little bit of help to make good decks. Most of that help comes from finding Greenglade Duos or finding another Azir, and then just not drafting Irelia anymore. And so it's a reasonable theme to draft, but it's heavily dependent on how many Greenglade Duos you can find and if you actually draw them. And then, to speak much more to this new format, as we push our ways down the tier list and we find more and more landmark style decks, I think Malphite is the only champion that can really sustain a landmark build around at this time. Just using Talia and using Lissandra, not real strategies at this point. And so as far as Malphite is concerned, he does not take a whole lot to actually get going. And then even if you abandon landmarks or don't get him to his flip state, then having, a 6'10" or whatever his stat line is still reasonable, right? He can still get into combat and do things. But, the big way I recommend that you try to build these Malphite-based decks are to not actually play landmarks that don't do anything. That's kind of like an odd way to say it, but I'm mainly leaning on the things like the Rock Bear generators and Ancient Preparations. These are just landmarks that you play and they don't do anything for like 3 turns, and after 3 turns you get a vanilla 5/4 unit. It's just not the way to approach these landmarks. As far as Malphite here is concerned, you want the units that generate landmarks, be that Rockhopper or the blue buff generator. You want just the good ones. In the removal spell, there's the 2-cost Targon one that just kills a unit. The big one as far as Malphite is concerned is Eye of Rahor Rock. You play it with Daybreak, it counts as 10 mana worth of casting cost of landmarks, so he only needs 2 more after that to flip. And then these spells that replace themselves. So right now there's a 3 mana spell that puts 2 vulnerable landmarks on the board and draws a card. And so all of these cards have like an immediate impact on the board and then give you landmarks as a bonus. And Malphite is kind of the best position to take care of that. We'll harp on this a little bit more as we push down the tier list, but the big takeaway here in tier 3 is if you are looking to build towards landmarks, you really need to be in Targon and you need Malphite to be your champion of choice. I cannot recommend building around either Talia or Lissandra at this time. So to push ourselves on down into tier 4, just a handful of changes here. We as we've perhaps alluded to, we needed to make some space down in tier 5. The changes just waterfalling or cascading through the tier list are we had a couple of units push up from tier 5 into tier 4. So Mega Keg Swain makes an appearance into tier 4, and then we've also pushed up both Disruption Yasuo and Disruption Solar Wind, or Yasuo Solar Winds. I will take one more moment to talk about the the Yasuo Solar Winds and the Leona pulls right here at the end of the video. But as it stands right now, the Mega Keg Swain isn't that spectacular. It tends to run a lot of 2-3 units that can't interact with the board, but it does have a lot of high quality 2-drops. And so I feel like you can, realistically piece together a Swain deck that can win some games. It still it runs into a stat problem of all of its 2-cost units being 2/3s. And so it's a reasonable card pool. You can perhaps get your Swain to flip and have some success with it, but it's certainly not a super strong one. But to be a little bit more positive as far as these card pools go, pushing up both Yasuos. I mean, he has always been like right on the cusp of being a real champion. It's just never been something where I could say, "Hey, go do a Yasuo build around because it's good." It's really awkward. I've always said since the release of the game that he feels like he's one card away from being a real champion, and he got 2 stuns added in this set. Raya of let's see if we can say it. Eye of Rahorak, fantastic card for Yasuo. Just it gives him 4 stuns, and so if he's not flipped yet, then he's gonna flip after that. And then it's just a very strong card in general, and so he's super excited to add a couple copies of that to his deck. If you manage to play 2 of them in the same game or copy one of them somehow, just a humongous amount of value you can catch out of these Yasuos. The other one is the addition of Solari Sunhawk, which we'll touch on in just a bit after we roll through tier 5, but that was a big movement here in Yasuo pushing up. He might be pushing up into tier 3 here in the near future. He's certainly our rising star of the tier list. But to finish off the tiers, down here in tier 5, as we've been mentioning with landmarks, all of the Lissandras and all of the Talias have been pushed into tier 5. It's just these are not pools that you can actually build around to any amount of success. As far as Lissandra goes, if you're building around the Frozen Thralls, and say you're in Geomancy, which doesn't have any countdown reduction cards in it, then you're just playing cards that don't do anything for 8 turns. Like you can't actually count on that to ever do anything. Lissandra's own landmark reduction or countdown reduction card is an epic, and so you can't expect that either. And so, if you're going to come out here and try to build around Frozen Thralls, you're really just like building to cards that are never going to have any effect on the game. And so, to the full build around standpoint, you really can't do it with Lissandra's. Now, Talia is a different story. Talia has a lot of the tools that would be needed to make these landmark decks good. She has a lot, she's kind of like, I guess, up in the air, you should say, as to whether or not she wants to focus on dealing with Predict or dealing with landmarks. To continue with the landmarks, the cards that exist just aren't strong enough in the correct numbers to make a real deck. The biggest jump that Talia got from this set is the 2 countdown reduction units. Something she sorely needed. There's the 2/2 for 2 that takes 2 ticks off of a card, and then there's the 4/4 for 4 or 4/4 for 5 that takes 3 ticks off of a card. Both of them are very powerful. Excuse me, but it's just like so abysmal having to play those cards to where they need other cards to be good. And so you often find yourselves where you have the hibernating rock bear, but you don't have the countdown reduction card, or you have the countdown reduction card but no rock bear, or it's like turn 9 and your hand is just like 2 countdown reducers but no landmarks on the board. Like it's the times when things go wrong do not make up for the times when things go right. And so it needs a much better joining of the polarity, if you will, a much more reduction to the center, to where things are better when they go right compared to when they go wrong. And so from the landmarks perspective, her cards are pretty bad. I think the things still stand that I mentioned with Malphite, to where you're looking for the landmark generators and not so much the actual landmarks themselves. But from that side of the equation, it's still pretty weak. The other thing that she does is with Predict. And Predict, there's just not enough payoff for that either. It's a reasonable ability to slap on some cards, like the 2-3 for 2 with Predict is a fantastic unit. The 2-4 for 3 that can get Elusive is kind of okay. There's some very strong cards like that 3-3 for 3 that puts +3/+3 on cards in your deck. But that is like kind of the only payoff card that exists, that +3/+3 to your deck card. And so, you're kind of like sitting around like predicting, but your cards are so weak that actually make the predicts that it doesn't make up for just improving the card quality of your next draw. So if it was a lot of these cards like the one that predicts and then takes a countdown 2 off of a card, that's like the closest one to being a playable card that just isn't. Maybe if it drew a card, it would be fantastic, or if it took countdown off and drew a card, it would be fantastic. It really feels like we need more predict payoff for these cards to be good. I don't like to dive too much into Magic the Gathering, but if you can think to a card like Lightning Rift in Magic, as to where you are getting a payoff for playing this humongous pile of cycling cards in your deck. That's what we need to see for Predict. There's just no payoff for making a whole bunch of Predicts. And so, I can't really recommend touching on these Talias, touching on these Lissandras at the time being. Is that to say that in the future, as more Shurima cards are released and more countdown reduction cards are released, that we'll change our tune? Absolutely, we could make that assessment in the future, but given the current state of the game right now, both of these champions card pools are abysmal. And so, the last thing I wanted to touch on, I kind of hinted to it with Yasuo. I didn't touch on Leona up here in Tier 2, but, with Leona, she is, struggling here recently. The Eye of Raharak is a big addition to her card pool, having an additional Daybreak card that she can add to her pool, but she has, a real struggle here these days to get a proper quantity of good cards to make a real deck. They diluted down her card pool right at the beginning of Call of the Mountain because it was too good. They added in all of these random cards that don't fit onto her theme, and she's really suffering from the card quality problem now. But with the addition of Solari Sunhawk, which I assume is going to make an appearance with the release of the 2.8 patch, she jumps right back up there in the strength. And so right now she's kind of struggling. If there was a tier 2.5, a tier 2.75, that's where Leona would be sitting. But I do think that with the addition of the Sunhawk, gives her, another fantastic early game play, gives her some board control. It gives us a double stun if Leona is flipped. I think that's going to be a fantastic addition. And the same thing applies down here with Yasuo. As I kind of mentioned, he's sort of pushing himself up into the land of tier 3. He just kind of needs a little bit more of a card to really push him over the edge and get into tier 3. I think that the Solari Sunhawk is what's going to do that. But as it stands, that card hasn't been added to Expedition yet. We don't know how many pools it's going to be added to, if it's just the Leonas or if it'll show up somewhere else. And so we don't really have enough information to go on to push Yasuo up a spot. And so we expect it to be good. Yasuo is really rising. I feel like he's a fan favorite, and Riot really wants to make him work. And so, that one additional stun that he really needs, wouldn't surprise me to see it be the Solari Sunhawk. But that is going to do it for our patch 2.7 tier list. Agree or disagree with anything we have to say here, be sure to let us know down in the comments. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.